What's that? Yep, good. Hey, everybody. So, amazing this has been around. How long did we say this was around? 9 years? 10 years. So about 10 years ago, I wrote the first book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development, the first book that talked about lean startup, customer development, product market fit. And it's really pretty amazing how far this has come and how far this competition has come. I was just having a conversation wishing that we could bring some of this to San Diego. San Diego's actually a little bit behind. We're going to do some workshop-y stuff here today. So hopefully we're getting a worksheet passed around to everybody. But I wanted to talk a little bit about where Lean Startup has gone. So back in the day when there was a small group of us, about 50 people in a Google group talking about Lean Startup and customer development and how to apply it. David Bland, I think, was there. David Benetti was there. Ash Mora was in that group. So a lot of the people that actually really developed how you actually do this stuff were sitting in this Google group, and we all thought it was just for startups. And basically the premise, and I think Steve Blank said, a startup is not a small version of a big company, but the premise is back in those days, we were still teaching startups how to look like big businesses. So my company now moves the needle. I'm actually teaching large businesses how to act more like startups. And we don't really want to underestimate what's going on. So there's fundamental changes in the world that's going on that makes working this way important. It's why large enterprises have to change. And a matter of fact, government has to change, and educational systems have to change. Nonprofits are changing. It's not just startups. And a lot of it has to do with what's on this slide, digital transformation. So the fact that we've got digital in everything in our life, Mark Anderson wrote about everything is, software is eating the world. We buy, books are software, music is software. Inside of our companies, the manufacturing floors are run by software, supply chains run by software. It's all zeros and ones out there. And it all means that things are moving so quickly, so fast, that the way we operate as human beings is the slow part. That's the bottleneck. And inside your companies, as you're growing up, your companies grow, you'll find out that competition is everywhere. It's not only from other startups, it's globalization. It's the fact that companies can compete all over the world. It's the fact that we don't know what Amazon's going to try to do next. We don't know what Facebook's going to do next, or Google. We've got Uber for cars. We've got Uber for helicopters. We've got Uber that's delivering food. What about Uber for life insurance? I mean, who knows what's coming next, right? So competition is not just from startups. It's everything is becoming more competitive. And customers are then more agile than they've ever been, and they're more agile than our companies are. And what I mean by that is that customers can change from one supplier to another supplier overnight. We don't live in this world anymore that you get to sort of stand on top of the mountain with a megaphone and dictate what your brand is and how your customers see you. Your customers own 50% of your brand. The brand is the relationship. It's not that they have a relationship with your brand. The brand is your relationship. So through social media and reviews and all of the knowledge that we have in our companies, your brand can change overnight, right? So no matter how much United says, fly the friendly skies, their brand is, or at least it was a couple of years ago, imagining somebody getting dragged off an airplane, right? So customers can change. This even happens in the B2B and business-to-business world. People can change vendors overnight. We don't have that old loyalty anymore. And so what it means is that we have to be close to our customers. We have to become more agile. And so all of these lean startup and agile practices that we talk about are very fundamental to the companies that we have to build. Our organization systems and structures inside of our companies, our government, our education is based upon the industrial age. The way you are being taught probably now, even to structure your companies, is to look like the extension of an assembly line. I've got my engineering team, my marketing team, my sales team, my facilities, my operations. It's an extension of the assembly line. It's based upon the industrial age. We're not in the industrial age anymore. And so instead, what we have to do is actually, we think about the way we want to work in this agile, lean fashion, and we have to figure out how do we structure our companies so that this becomes a natural way of working. So what we struggle with inside of large enterprises right now is, because they're based upon this departmental approach, we have to, by hook or crook, we have to form these cross-functional teams and teach them to go out and talk to their customers instead of structuring a company in such a way that that's the natural way to work. And so I challenge you, anybody that has a growing startup or a scalable startup, is to look at some of these alternative structural models so that you're not fighting against the structure of the company in order to work in this lean way. And so what it comes down to is this ability inside our businesses to balance this execute and explore. So when we know something, when we have facts, when the market has spoken to us and we understand what we need to do and build, we're in execution mode. And if we don't know, if we're building products or we want to build a product for a market but we don't know enough about the market, then we're in the unknown. And fundamentally, we have to operate differently when we're in the known from when we're in the unknown. And so the challenge for a large enterprise is we've optimized our company for executing in the known. That's how you've become big and successful. The market's well understood, the problems are well understood, the solutions are well understood, and so we optimize an execution engine based upon a blueprint that we've already figured out. When we're first starting a business, when we're a startup and we're facing the unknown, we don't have a blueprint. So we work in this explore way, we figure it out, we try to create that blueprint. We have to go and interact with our customers to learn from them. We run experiments in order to test our hypotheses. And then we have to start building that execution engine. So it's a continuum. It's this balance wherever we're working. Where do we have unknowns? I have to operate in a different way. Where do I have knowns? I need to build that blueprint and execute. And what we call operating in the unknown space, wherever there's uncertainty, this entrepreneurial spirit. And the entrepreneurial spirit I define with the 3 E's of lean innovation. So when I first wrote the first book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development, my co-author, Patrick Vlaskovitz, and I, we concentrated on the principles. So there's a lot of how-to stuff out there, but frankly, in the end, for you to be successful, you have to digest the principles and make them your own and not just go do it the way other people have done it. And so the fundamental principles that you have to understand: empathy, understanding your customers deeply. This does not mean ask your customers what they want and do what they say. It's understanding why they say what they say. It's understanding what their aspirations are. It's understanding what their needs are and what the impact on their lives might be by solving those needs. And so you can call this customer development. There's also design thinking principles, human-centered design, jobs to be done. There's all sorts of methodologies out there for you to learn from and apply. But the important point is to really understand what's driving your customer. It's not simply going and interviewing them and asking them to predict their own future. When you interact with customers, don't ask them, will you do this? Will you pay for this? Customers are horrible at predicting their own future, so don't ask them to. The second E, experimentation. So experimentation is not just throwing stuff against the wall. It's taking a rigorous approach, a hypothesis. If I do X, Y percentage of my customers will behave in way Z, and then I go do that X. I go and run that experiment, and then I'm going to use the third E, evidence, insights plus the data to help me make decisions. And this is really hard. It sounds easy, but using the evidence is really hard. I was in a conversation last night talking about the fact that there's this lean startup software out there, and the people that are actually selling the lean startup software did not apply lean startup principles to developing the software. Why? Because they just know it's true. They know it's going to work. Right? So it's really hard to check your own biases, and that's why you want to have this data and the insights that you glean in order to evaluate whether you're going in the right direction. So I can dive into these a little bit. There's a famous story. I don't know if you've seen this. So this is a pharmaceutical company interviewing their customers. Do you have any problems getting the tops off of your pill bottles? Oh, no, I don't have any problems. Okay, show me how you do it. Elderly woman takes the interviewer over to a meat slicer. That's how she got the top off her pill bottles. You don't get this out of an interview. You don't get this out of a survey. You actually have to, there's a lean turn, Genshi Gebutsu. You have to go to the source. You have to see it for yourself. Some of the best customer development or empathy work I've seen is a company that just goes and hangs out inside of this large enterprise for 2 weeks, following the HR managers around, following the hiring managers around for this recruiting solution. And just watched how they interacted and how they dealt with candidates, and found just really extraordinary things that they could go build and fix. The experiments, again, this is like out in the wild. So one on this side, this is a surgeon in a hospital putting her hands in a physical prototype, a cardboard prototype of a hand atomizer, to see if she'd be willing to put her hands in there for 30 seconds to clean, to disinfect her hands instead of washing her hands at a sink. The riskiest hypothesis this team had came up with was surgeons would not stand there and put their hands in a box for 30 seconds. They went to the hospital, ran the experiment, 29 out of 30 would do it. So maybe that wouldn't have been your riskiest assumption, but that's what the team came up with. Based upon the data, they moved forward. So again, hypothesis. If we do X, Y percentage of people will behave in way Z. You go and run that experiment, use the data. So I wanted to play a brief video that really also explains why you run experiments and why you don't ask your customers to predict their future.
However, the Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival wrapped up yesterday. It's a huge concert, goes over 2 weekends. It's out in the middle of the California desert. More than 60 bands played at Coachella this year. Some of them big bands, some of them not so big, some are up-and-coming bands. And music fans in general love knowing about bands that no one else has ever heard of. So we decided to conduct an experiment. We sent a camera crew to Coachella, and we asked people walking into the venue what they thought of a bunch of bands whose names we made up, okay? These bands are so obscure that they do not exist. Except for one name you'll hear, we made all of them up, but that didn't stop people from saying they knew them in tonight's special Coachella edition of Live Witness News.
One of my favorite bands this year is Dr. Shlomo and the GI Clinic. Yeah. They're amazing. Yeah, they're always amazing. He's really good on the flex stick. Yeah, I'm really excited to see them live. I think that's going to be one of the bands that's going to be really great live. Did you see them when they played at Lollapalooza? No, I didn't. I'm so mad. I'm so mad. Have you heard of Shorty Jizzle and the Thunder Crimes? Yeah. What do you think about them? Like how raw they are?
Yeah, they're really unique, for sure.
They feel a little bit like a combination between like Bob Dylan and like a polka band.
Yeah,
Are you guys as excited as I am about the obesity epidemic?
I just like the whole style, the whole genre is great. They're kind of like very innovative, they're new.
There's some smaller bands that are playing, Two-Door Cinema Club.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Do you like their album DJ Cornmeal?
Yeah, actually, I had a radio show on a community radio station up in Canada, and I used to listen to them all the time.
Oh wow, that's really great. One of my favorite bands this year is called Get the Out of My Pool.
Yeah, actually. I prefer to go with my friends. I don't know because if they're my friends that I did not think this, so not interested.
One of my favorite things today, straight out of Williamsburg, the Chelsea Clintons.
Oh, yeah, I have heard of them, actually. No, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to see them or not, but I do know of their music.
What did you hear about them?
I think they're just fun.
What's fun about the Chelsea Clintons?
I think they just give up that energy.
Yeah.
Like, you can just tell that they're doing it from a good place, and Like there's very few apps that like give you that feeling.
Did you know that Coachella is actually the American Indian word for dumb white guy?
Don't go ask your customers what they want. They will not tell you the truth. So that's why we run experiments. We actually want to get the behavior that indicates whether your assumption is true or not. You want to get the behavior that indicates whether they want the value that you're proposing to them. So that's the trick. How can I get that? So there's a bunch of different types of things, currency, right? People give you money, that's a pretty good indication that they want. But it could be that they give you a letter of intent on their corporate letterhead, or they could give you a couple of hours and they'll help you design what a layout might look like. Or maybe they will attend a webinar or something. Think about the behavior that indicates whether your assumption is true or not, and that's where you want to run these experiments. So I have this framework in my book, The Lean Entrepreneur, I call this value stream discovery. And so basically, your customer has 7 states that they go through from first becoming aware of your product to becoming passionate. And so for each one of these states, what you can do is imagine what is the behavior that indicates that a customer is at this state? What do I have to do to get them there? And then how do I measure whether they're there or how many are there? And basically, this gives you a dashboard that tells you where you need to focus your energy on. So you already have companies that are in business. You already have customers. You might be concentrating on what I call the satisfied metric, which is also known as, it's the same thing as like an active user or an engaged user. And so in the satisfied, your assumption might be that a satisfied user is someone who, uploads a video and shares it with 10 of their friends once a week. How do they actually interact with your product over some period of time that indicates that they're getting the value that you've promised to them? And so early on, your metric is, well, I've got no people there, so I need to get, one person to do that. And then after you get 1, you need 10. And then after 10, you need 100. And then you might start looking at, well, what's my month-over-month growth of people that are getting to this active user? And so that metric sort of changes over time that gives you indication of whether you're getting traction. And you can do that for each one of these states, so you know that if I increase the number of people that are coming into my application, I know that I'm getting this amount of revenue, and so I'm going to go concentrate on another part of this funnel. So I wanted to step you through part of this. So what we've passed out here is sort of what I call the value stream discovery board, and I've sort of shaped it like this diamond, because the diamond nugget of the value stream is this intrigued and satisfied and passionate. And if you nail those 3 things, you will have a business. You will be in business. And the rest of those states end up being really optimizing the business and growing the business. And so what you want to be able to do is you start with a market segment. And in the value stream or in the Lean Entrepreneur, I talk a lot about, hopefully you've learned a lot about that you have to go narrow before you go big, right? That you actually have to focus on a small market segment when you're going to market. You want to have a big vision, you're going to change the world, but in order to get started, you have to narrow in, like, who is the most likely person to use your product? Who has the most amount of pain that you're solving for? Who's going to stand in line at Best Buy in order to get the iPhone when it first comes out, right? What is that makeup of those individuals that make my early adopter market segment? And so I teach people, think about a market segment not based upon demographics, but based upon people who share the same needs, share the same passion or the same problem, and speak the same language. And by speak the same language, I mean that they will refer to each other for solutions. They hang out together. There's a company in San Francisco that called Beta Brands, and I think this is a good example. They made, what they do is they make articles of clothing for particular communities. communities that sort of already exist. And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. So think about one of their first products was bike to work pants. So they actually made slacks that had cuffs that you would turn up that were reflective, and you could pull a little flag out of the back pocket that was reflective, so it would be safer when you were biking to work, maybe early in the morning in San Francisco. And so the community that they're going after is not based upon age or income or demographics. It's based upon people who bike to work. And that community actually already exists. They maybe go and do critical mass together, which is when they go and ride downtown and block all the traffic. Or it could be that they've got they ride on the weekends together, road biking. So you think about it, the community already exists and they share the same problem, the same need. They bike to work. And so then you go after that particular market segment with that particular product. And they would only produce 100 of these slacks, and they would try it out, and when it was successful, they would blow it up, and if it's not successful, they haven't made a huge investment. So I want you to think about, and I'm guessing you guys are probably already there, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I want you to think about the way you develop your market segments. So here's some characteristics, like how deep is the pain? Do they have budget? How easy is it for you to reach this group of people, this pattern of individuals that represent a market segment? How simple is the sales cycle? These are the type of criteria that you want to use to choose the market segment that you're going to concentrate on. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to go after these other market segments. What it means is that you're going to nail your value proposition. You're going to figure out how to provide value for this narrowly defined market segment before you start broadening it out. So a couple of examples of what startup segments might look like. Young male hipsters who hate to shop for clothes but can't find stylish stuff to wear on their own. So this was a company at a hackathon that came up with that. Restaurant owners who are also the head chef, and they don't have time to go and source fresh meats and produce for their menus that are customized. So that requires a very specific type of restaurant where that's going to be the biggest problem. It's not that they're going to go after all restaurants. And a matter of fact, in our book, we talk about the anti-segment. You can look at two restaurants from the outside, and they look exactly the same. They're about the same size. The chef is the owner. So structurally, they might look really similar. But one is this head chef that wants to customize the menu. The other one is a family-owned restaurant that hasn't changed the menu in 30 years, right? And so their needs are different, and you can't tell from the outside. You actually have to go in and figure it out. So I'm going to skip this exercise, but what I want you to think about as you go through this exercise is to think about what is that market segment that you're focused on? What is that pattern of individuals that represents who you should be going after first? And then we actually have these Zoom tools that help you describe. This is available for free on my website if you're interested. But I'm not going to dive into that because I want to save time for getting into the actual value stream. So the first part of this diamond nugget is what we call intrigued. And so you can imagine if somebody comes to your website, they're going to look at your messaging and they're going to decide whether they think your product is for them. So there's two parts of an intrigued message. The first part is this utility function. You are going to address a very specific need with your product. It's what I call this utility function. You have to fulfill that promise or you don't have a business. The second part of your intrigued message is the aspirational one. So this is, what is the journey that this person is going to join with you? What is it about your product or your company that makes them want to be a part of what you're up to, right? So I'll give you an example. There's an entrepreneur I was helping in Toronto. And he was making a music app. So it would go on an iPad. And he told me that if my daughter used the app, then she would practice her music more. So I'm paying for lessons, music lessons, singing lessons for my daughter. And if she used the app, she would practice her music more. I thought, okay, that's cool. She doesn't practice. It'd be great if she practiced more. And I asked him, well, why are you building this app? What's driven you to build the app? And he said, to save parents money. And I was like, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't make sense to me. I was like, no, why are you driven to do it? Why are you as a startup decide to start a business around this music app? And he goes, oh, well, it's because I'm a musician. And I go, okay, that's interesting. What about being a musician? And he said, well, I want kids to grow up to love music. And I go, yeah, me too. I want my daughter to grow up to love music. That's why I'm paying for the lessons. He can't promise that my daughter will grow up to love music. I can't promise that. But that's the journey that we can go on together. So it's this utility promise, she'll practice her music more, and this journey that we can go on together that maybe she'll grow up to love music. And so if you think about it, that aspirational part is what drives passion. So the utility function drives satisfaction, and the aspirational part drives passion. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But what I want you to do, and we're actually going to take a few minutes to do it, but what I want you to do is I want you to come up with what your Intrigue message would be based upon that utility function and that aspiration. So an example that I like to use is Slack. Slack's messaging is around people saving time. I actually think it's kind of a soft message. But basically, what they're trying to solve were teams that had a tough time communications getting lost in email, text messages flying all around, people using different text messaging platforms, and it was stressful for the agile managers because they weren't getting this communication going. So if you actually use Slack, the utility function is that your communications problems for your teams are going to be solved, and the aspirational message is that you're going to relax, you're going to have an easier time, and probably what he means is you're actually going to be a better manager, and you're going to be able to move your company forward or your team forward because you've actually solved this problem. So you can go back to like some of the best startups in the world. You can go back, and I love using the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine, and go look at different startups' messaging as it grew over time. And you can see when they're looking for that aspirational message. YouTube early on was the utility function was obvious. You can upload videos and share them with your friends. But when YouTube first got started, I can't remember the name of this guy. There was a guy that was traveling around the world doing silly dances. Does anybody remember that? Anybody old enough to remember that? I can't remember what this guy's name was, but he would post, what's that?
Where the hell is Matt?
Yeah, exactly. Where the hell is Matt? And so YouTube actually got Matt to start uploading his videos to YouTube. And the guy was like the first video sensation. And he became like one of the first YouTube stars because YouTube took this. The guy was doing it independent of YouTube, and they brought it onto YouTube because their aspirational message really was in the early days, you could become a YouTube star too, right? And so the same thing is with Airbnb. I think Airbnb is a cool example because their target market are sort of young, urban professionals, kind of hipsters that want to have experiences when they travel. They don't want to just go sit in a hotel. They want to act like a local. And so their messaging really evolved around, hey, you're going to feel like a local if you use Airbnb. So it's super interesting, very targeted. It's not just the utility, hey, you're going to find a room. It's going to make you feel better about your travel experiences. So you want to be able to combine that utility plus this aspirational message to get people to join. So, we're going to take, how much time do I have? 25 minutes. So let's take 5 minutes, work on it with your table. If you have questions, let me know and I'll come around and help. But come up with what your utility function is and your aspirational message for whatever project or startup you're working on. 5 minutes. So how did we do? So the trick here is like what you want to be able to do is measure that messaging is working. So the three things again that we want to be able to document: what it actually is that utility function plus that aspiration. Where am I putting it? So maybe it's a website. And then what is the behavior that indicates that the person is actually intrigued? So we were just talking over here that they're doing telesales, right? So if you're actually giving your messaging over the phone, what's the indication that you get that they're intrigued? It's not that the person buys. I mean, that works too, but that's sort of hopping all the way to convinced. If it takes multiple calls, or maybe the person actually requests more information, hey, can you send me information? Well, that would be an indication of intrigue. If somebody comes to your website and they look at their messaging, and then what they do is they download a case study or a lead magnet, that would be indication that they were intrigued. So again, it's sort of like I was talking about with the experiments. You want to be able to get to what is the behavior that indicates that that message is resonating. And so you're really you're starting to build out what your marketing and your sales funnel looks like. And again, the other thing that entrepreneurs too often do is they try to automate that stuff at the very beginning. But really at the beginning, you want to do that in person, because that's how you're going to get the feedback about whether that's working. Automation is really what you want to do. When you're automating, you want to automate what you've already proven. You want to prove it in person first. So the second part of this that I wanted to talk about was the satisfied. So satisfied happens when somebody has received the value that you've promised them, and so they're going to continue to interact with your product on a regular basis in order to continue to get that value. So if you're running an e-commerce site, then they're not really, it's just transactional. Maybe it's that they'll come back and buy something else from your site. So again, you want to be able to measure it over time. SaaS products are the easiest. People log on to the SaaS app and they interact with very specific functionality several times a day, or several times a week, or several times a month. Whatever that cadence is that indicates that they're getting that utility function that you promised them. So the music app, ideally my daughter would use it every day or every other day, or at least one time in between her lessons. So if you haven't built product yet, then the MVP, the minimum viable product, is what do I have to build in order to deliver that utility function? And so a little bit different than Eric Ries, I actually separate MVP out from experiment. A minimum viable product is an experiment with a high degree of fidelity, but it's me trying to deliver the actual value. It's not just trying to measure the behavior or measure whether I'm going down the right path. Like, to me, a landing page is not an MVP. A landing page is an experiment. The MVP is when I'm actually trying to deliver the minimum viable product. And please remember that viable is as important as minimum. So there's a lot of writers that talk about desirability and sort of these other qualities. Viable encompasses all of that. Viable means that somebody's paying for it, or at least using it if you've got a freemium model. So Slack figured out at some point in their development that when a team reached 2,000 messages sent, they would be an engaged user. They would stay on the platform. So they then optimized their business to get these teams to 2,000 messages. When Facebook was already at, 150, 250 million users, and they were trying to get another growth curve, they figured out that if a new person signed up for Facebook and they they had 10 friends, 10 of their friends on the network within the first week, they would become engaged users. So they optimized the product to get 10 friends within the first 7 days. So you're looking for a similar type of an engagement metric. How often do people have to use very specific functionality in my product, and then I know that they're going to stick with it? And you optimize your business, you optimize your product, you optimize your drip campaigns, your marketing, in order to get your market segment to that level. It's not passionate yet, but you're proving that by delivering this functionality, they're getting the utility promise. So I want you to take another 5 minutes here and describe what you have to provide in order to provide that utility function that you defined in your Intrigue message. What is the behavior that indicates that your customer is getting the value? And you have to put it over some time frame. Clear? Good to go? 5 minutes. Let me know if you need some help. So how'd we do on that one? We good? So I think that I always like when people come around and ask questions, because it reminds me of things that I can share with the rest of you about different business models. There are people selling products that are more transactional, right? That the product is supposed to last for a year or multiple years. So how do you measure satisfaction? And it could be that you're selling other type of consumables. It's sort of like the printer model, right? If somebody buys a printer, they're only going to buy a printer not that often. But if they continue to buy ink in order to use the printer, then you would measure the purchases of the ink as an indication of satisfaction. It could also be like Airbnb. They kind of have a problem in the sense that how many times does a satisfied user actually stay with Airbnb? It could be like, once every 3 months or something. And so then it's like the time lag in order to measure satisfied becomes really difficult. So what are other things, like you think creatively, what are the other things I can do inside my business model that would help me measure whether people are still feeling satisfied or engaged or active with my product? And so Airbnb has forums. So that might also be an indication of passion, which I'll get into next. But if people are actually going and posting reviews, that could be an indication of satisfaction. Or if they're participating on the forums, that could be an indication of satisfaction. So it's one of those things in this digital age. Think about something that you could do inside of your business model, even if you're transactional. What is something that you can do that would indicate that people are getting the value from the product that they're already owning? How can you bring them back to your website or to your social media platforms that indicate that they're still getting that value that you promised them? And so that's another way that you can figure out how to measure this stuff rather than just the interaction with the product itself. So the last one I wanted to talk about here was passionate. And passionate is super interesting because I don't think entrepreneurs typically think about passion separate from that utility function. And people are hoping that their product is so good that it's going to drive passion. And it's usually not the case. So sometimes, when the iPhone first came out, I loved the iPhone. I mean, it's kind of like, so what now? But back in the day, the user experience of the iPhone was so extraordinary that people could be passionate about it. So it does happen. But most likely, it's something else in your business model that drives this passion. And it's related to whatever that journey is or that aspiration, right? So that music app example, the journey of hopefully my daughter growing up to love music. But so where else might it happen? So Zappos. Nobody's passionate about buying shoes online, but their customer support is extraordinary, right? You're a woman and you go buy a pair of shoes and you're like, oh man, I hope they look great. I gotta wait for them now. Zappos randomly upgrades people's shipping to overnight so that like they show up the next day and you're like, oh wow, and you try them on, they look like crap and you're like, that sucks. And then they'll send you your next pair of shoes while you're shipping, you're returning the other ones, right? They don't wait. So it's like an extraordinary customer service makes people passionate about Zappos. There was a soap company called Method. How do you disrupt soap? Well, they put it in containers where housewives were putting the containers on top of the sink instead of under the counter, and completely disrupted that market. So we've got customer support, we've got packaging. HubSpot, when they were first getting going, people are familiar with HubSpot, right? The content marketing platform, sales automation. Nobody's passionate about a platform, a software platform. It has to perform that utility function. But they hit this growth curve that was extraordinary because they did amazing content marketing. Their whole shtick around their content marketing was to make people better entrepreneurs. So they taught people how to be better marketers. They had tools for evaluating the website. They had free ebooks. They had great blog posts. They had all of these passionate customers, passionate people that weren't even customers yet that would share all of their social media and this different content marketing. So that was to make people better entrepreneurs. That was the journey they went on. Or, Tom's Shoes, giving out shoes to homeless people for every pair of shoes that they sell. That's the journey. We're going to make the world a better place. So something inside of your business model that's probably not your product that's going to drive this passion. And what is the behavior that indicates people are passionate? Well, they share your stuff on social media. They post pictures of themselves with your product. Is a great indication of passion. Who does that? You don't do that for a product that you're like, yeah, it's all right. No, you do it for the ones that you love. So passionate people put new customers, new prospects into the top of your marketing funnel without you spending a dime on marketing. That's passion. That's why you see companies that they start generating buzz, they start seeing organic growth. That's when you want to raise money if you're trying to go big. That's when you want to put a foot on the accelerator. Marketing's not about creating buzz. Marketing is about amplifying the buzz that you're already creating. You want to see this organic growth, and that's when you want to automate. That's when you want to go big. But your product and your company needs to be generating that buzz because of this aspirational, this journey, plus the fact that you're solving this need. So Slack actually talked about how, let's see, I got it on this next quote. So this is a quote from an article about Slack. One of the founders says, the literal word of mouth will only get to a handful of people, but if someone tweets about us, it can be seen by hundreds, even thousands. And they have this tweet board that they talked about, which was all of these people saying, yeah, I gave this to my whole team. I sent this around to my whole company. All of this tweeting and this passionate behavior was how they just saw this rocket ship growth. So what we're going to do here is, again, we're going to spend 5 minutes, and I want you to think about what inside of your business model do you need to do, or you think that you need to do, in order to drive this passionate behavior, and how are you going to measure it?
Hey, Brant.
Yep.
We need to actually wrap.
Okay. Couple minutes. All right. Can we take 2 minutes to do it? Can we take 2 minutes? All right, 2 minutes. All right, so I'm going to wrap up. I'm around for the next couple of days if you want to talk about any of this stuff, though. Real quickly, the other states are about optimization, but if you're actually tracking the data on these different states, The idea is that you can find out where your bottleneck is. So that would be where you're focusing your lean innovation, where you're focusing your empathy experiments and evidence. So if my bottleneck is that I'm getting 150 people to my landing page, but only 15 downloading my lead magnet, if I improve that, I know that I'm going to get more at the end of my funnel because I understand what the conversions are all the way through the path. And so I want, people think about product market fit as being like binary. Like, oh, I figured out how to grow now, and now I'm going to grow forever. But growth is actually, that's the exception. Being sort of stuck is the standard state of business. It really is. Growth is what happens in between bottlenecks. Your job is actually to always be removing the next bottleneck. And when you're a big company, you can have multiple agile teams that are taking out multiple bottlenecks. But when you're a startup and there's only a handful of you, then you have to focus, where should I be putting my energy? And so it's quite possible that your engineering team should not be working on the next feature because maybe your engagement metric, your satisfied metric is already strong. Maybe your engineering team should be helping marketing run experiments to figure out how to overcome a conversion, like getting them through convinced. So again, I'm around, just a final thought, it used to be back in the day, startups was all about intellectual property and do you have patents and what's your patent portfolio look like. In today's day and age, it's the insights that you have on your customers that's your competitive advantage. Your ability to very quickly capitalize on what you learn is your competitive advantage. And so anybody that goes through a course like this or a competition like this, you have a leg up on your competition that doesn't behave this way because you're out getting insights into your customers and learning how to capitalize it. So thank you very much.